Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Earlier this week, we got another batch of casting news to kick off the new year as we eagerly await the release of the second season of the live-action One Piece series. Now, we still don't have an official date as to exactly when Season 2 is going to drop, but many expect it to be sometime this year, citing the mouth movements of Jeff Ward in that set tour video from a few months ago. I did a huge in-depth breakdown on that if you're interested. There's lots of cool details in there. Now, more recently, back in December, in an interview with Serial Killers, Vincent Reagan, who played Garp in Season 1, mentioned that he had finished all of his scenes for the second season and that production would wrap fairly soon, with him expecting work on Season 3 to start not too long after, and for Season 2 to release by Christmas of 2025, which would be pretty fitting given the wintry atmosphere of the Drum Island finale. Netflix has not given any indication of a release date just yet, but remember that we only got the official release date for Season 1 alongside the first teaser trailer less than 3 months prior to its August 31st premiere date during the Netflix To Doom event in mid-June of 2023, so there's plenty of time if it's actually coming out this year. In the meantime, there's going to be lots of news, leaks, rumors, and other speculation to talk about, so be sure to stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay in the loop with all things live action. That said, let's get into this casting news. On Tuesday, January 14th, we got an interesting group of antagonists for this season, starting with Miss Goldenweek, to be played by Sophia Anne Caruso, who you may be familiar with as the lead in The School for Good and Evil and in the Broadway production of Beetlejuice. Miss Goldenweek was one of the more high-profile characters that fans have been awaiting casting for, as she was strangely absent alongside her partner in crime, Mr. 3, back in June of 2024, when it was announced that Daniel Desmalchian would be playing the beloved Galdino. That batch of casting included the other major Brokeworks agents that we would meet in the first half of the season, so some even wondered if Miss Goldenweek was perhaps cut from the story. However, she was one of the handful of characters that we had gotten leaked casting details for back in May, so there was no real reason to think that she would not be in the season. In that casting description, we learned that they were looking for an actress who was at least 18 years old and could give a deadpan performance, something like Wednesday Addams. It also mentioned that she would be making people into her playthings by turning them into living dolls at her tea party of horrors. Now, this is likely all an adaptation of her hypnotic color trap abilities that allowed her to influence her enemy's behavior through her paint. The Tea Party of Horrors may be a reimagining of her little picnics or tea breaks that we would see in the source material. Interestingly, among the photos from Oda's set visit, which by the way I also did an in-depth breakdown of on the channel, there was one of a dining table being set up in the middle of what looked to be a forested area. Now, given the presence of waitstaff, it's fairly probable that this was actually just part of a big meal celebrating Oda's visit, or even something from craft services, but part of me does wonder if this is actually the tea party set from the casting description. We'll just have to see. Also, while on the topic of set pieces from Little Garden, not too long ago, there was a leaked set photo of what looks to be wax statues of Luffy and Mr. 3 floating around. These were of course used by Mr. 3 to deceive the Straw Hats throughout the arc, and were made to look convincing thanks to Miss Goldenweek's painting prowess. While Little Garden is most well remembered for the introduction of the giant story in Brogy, I can't help but feel the real stars of this arc in the live action will be Mr. 3 and Miss Goldenweek. I mean, after all, they are being portrayed by some of the more high-profile names in the cast, and I'm excited to see these characters get brought to life. Alongside Miss Goldenweek, we also got the casting announcements for Chess and Kuromarimo, who you may remember as Wapple's Chief of Staff and Magistrate. They'll be played by South African actors Mark Penwell and Anton David Jefta. Now, I guess the theme of this batch of casting is the supporting characters to the main antagonists, as many also assumed that these two were being cut when they weren't announced alongside Wapple and Dalton back in June, or the rest of the Drum Island supporting cast in August. Even I was a bit worried, as we did see many smaller characters get cut from Season 1, and with speculation brewing that Brokeworks would play a role in the Drum Island story arc, it seemed plausible that Wapple's top henchman would not be needed. But thankfully, the creative team is committed to staying as true to the cast of characters as possible. I personally adore Chess's introduction in the series. I think it's one of the best character reveals that Oda has ever done to this day. See, at this point in the story, you already have the sense that this world's not completely normal, but it all gets taken to another level of wackiness with this goofy archer standing atop the ocean, only for it to get revealed that he's actually standing in the crow's nest of a giant submersible pirate ship. It's just another instance of Oda's world becoming bigger, crazier, and more advanced in terms of technology. I really would be a bit disappointed if they're not able to adapt this sequence, so here's hoping. Now, an eyebrow-raising detail you may have keyed in on is that Kuromarimo looks to be being referred to as KM in this series. It's unlikely that this abbreviation was made due to the length of the name, as we've seen longer character names included in these announcements graphics before, such as the aforementioned Miss Goldenweek. There may be a few explanations, though take all of this as speculative commentary. For one, perhaps they thought the name may be too confusing for viewers. Kuromarimo is admittedly a bit of a mouthful, and perhaps the most obviously Japanese-sounding name in the live action so far, though I don't know that it was abbreviated for that reason in particular, since we do get an even more complex Japanese name in this second batch of casting. Well, at least for the general Western audience who may not have a great grasp on the language. Perhaps they were also motivated by a need to distance Kuromarimo from Kuro in Season 1, thinking that a more casual viewer may be confused by the similarity in their names. Or maybe this was the result of not wanting to convey some of the potentially problematic connections that inspired this character's design. In Japanese, Kuro means black, and Marimo is a type of algae or moss that can grow in the shape of a ball. The whole quote-unquote joke being that this character's hairstyle, the afro, resembles black balls of algae. Now, you may be familiar with the term Marimo from Sanji, as he often uses it to disparage Zoro, with the phrase moss head being used in the English translations. You can see how this sort of joke could easily be misconstrued as something a little more insulting, akin to racist caricature even, especially with Kuromarimo's power set involving the use of afro-shaped puffballs as boxing gloves. So with all of that, I can understand this desire to not want to effectively name this character Black Mossball. Like I said, this is all just speculation on my part. The name change could be for any combination of these reasons, or for something that we have not even considered. That said, the good folks of the One Piece live action Discord server managed to come across a few photos depicting this character's costume and props, and here you can see his long shirt or tunic with the buttons running down the center. And interestingly, it seems they may be willing to make use of his fighting gimmick with the multiple puffballs. It's hard to tell, but it looks like they could also be connected by a string, making me wonder if this may even be part of his costume for the flashback to around 6 years prior when he was seen with longer hair running down his back. Of course, the big question with these two characters is if we'll see the product of Wappo's Munch Factory with Chess Marimo. Something like this seems a bit impractical for the live action, and perhaps not the greatest use of resources, but I could see some sort of combination technique that nods to this fused form. The next day, on Wednesday, January 15th, we got the second batch of casting that included characters that for the most part could be considered allies in one way or another. Headlining this group was the announcement for Dragon, who's to be played by Rigo Sanchez. He's had a fairly long career spanning the 2000s, so you may have seen him in various roles before. Now, right off the bat, they're holding the mystery around this character pretty close to the chest, choosing to only refer to him as Dragon, since we wouldn't get his full name until much later on after the events of Enies Lobby. Their commitment to maintaining the full identities of characters is pretty commendable, as they did similarly with the casting in the first season for characters like Kuro and Monkey D. Garp. And we've seen that in the other announcements from this season as well, with Miss Wednesday, Miss All Sunday, and Mr. Zero. Of note, another reason to believe we will get Season 2 sometime this year can be found on Rigo Sanchez's Instagram page, where he has listed for some time now that the second season will be in 2025. As of recording, this date is still on there. Now, if you've been following the live action news closely since the last season, you may remember that there was already an actor associated with this role in Dean Damonce. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, his scenes ended up being cut, leaving only a hint of Dragon's presence during the Logtown execution scene in episode 1 with this cloaked man here, just as we saw him in chapter 0. The rest of his scenes were likely also in this flashback sequence, as Dean posted a photo of himself in costume alongside an unnamed pirate who we saw rushing to find the One Piece after Roger's famous final words. All things considered, Dragon does not have a very large role in the early part of the series after Logtown, with his only appearance in the Alabasta saga being in the drum flashback to the Reverie, where we see him brought up as a potential major threat to the world. That said, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were interested in carving more story out for this character, given how important he and his affiliates end up being as the story progresses. In that drum flashback is when we first learn that he is a revolutionary who is viewed as an enemy by the world government. Wappo dismisses his threat to his own country, and as such, shows no concern. It would be pretty interesting if in the live action, the revolutionaries are involved in helping the people of Drum in some capacity, since they effectively want to stage a revolution by dethroning their own king. Similarly, there may even be some thought to getting the revolutionary forces involved in Alabasta, perhaps by aiding the rebel army, though this may get a bit convoluted with all the various characters and factions already in the mix. There are a few other interesting developments involving Dragon that could get adapted given what we know about him from the story beyond the Drum Island arc, so if you're interested in that, you may want to stick around for the rest of the section. Otherwise, to remain spoiler free, I recommend skipping ahead to the next section where we'll discuss Igaram and then Ipponmatsu. Alright, so about 1,000 chapters after the Logtown arc, we got a flashback where we saw several characters reacting to Luffy's first bounty. Among these included Dragon, who asked Sabo about the marine in charge of Logtown. While we weren't necessarily sure why Dragon was there at the time, we would eventually learn that he intended to see Luffy off, and this scene reinforces that with him expressing concern over any potential enemies Luffy may encounter. I could see this being adapted in some form in episode 1, with perhaps even a stand-in portraying Sabo. Who knows, maybe they'll even make a nod to that old debunked theory that Sabo was in the crowd during Luffy's execution scene by having Sabo go along with Dragon to Logtown. Similarly, they may decide to expound upon Roger's execution at Logtown in this season, as we do know Michael Dorman returned to reprise his role of the Pirate King, so we could get a more explicit scene of Dragon in the crowd as well, just as we saw in Chapter 0. After the events of Enies Lobby, Garp would reunite with Luffy and reveal to him that Dragon was his father, explaining that Dragon had said he saw Luffy off at Logtown. This is another scene that we never saw on the page in the manga, but a brief meeting between Garp and Dragon at Logtown could be feasible in the live action, given how Garp has already been placed in the East Blue in Season 1. Of course, he should be heading toward Marine HQ if they are adapting the subsequent entries of the Kobe Meppo cover story, but a quick stop at Logtown seems within reason, as it would allow Garp, Kobe, and Helmeppo to make an appearance in Season 2 before Smoker and Tashigi take over the reins of the Marine B-plot. Now, this does bring up an interesting question about whether or not they will or should disclose Dragon's full name in this season. Many fans were very skeptical of revealing Garp's relation to Luffy in Season 1, though I do think it worked out for the best given how they were able to weave the Kobe Meppo cover story into the main plot. However, Dragon doesn't really have that same kind of presence in the source material to where a similar treatment would be necessary. Of course, we did just discuss the various routes they could take to extend his role in this stretch of story, so personally, I wouldn't have much of an issue with it, but I am curious to see what you think. I totally get the hesitancy with revealing future developments so early on in the series, though at the same time, I do enjoy how they've shaken up the story we know and love to have surprises for even longtime fans. So let me know where your head is at down in the comments. We also got the casting for Igaram, who is to be played by South African actor Yondo Thomas. We actually got a sneak peek of what looked to be his outfit during that set tour video a few months ago, but the real interesting part of this casting reveal is that unlike all of the other Baroque Works agents, Igaram is not presented with his codename, Mr. 8. This could just be a lapse in consistency and nothing to think too hard about, and while I think this is probably the case, I can't help but wonder if this was intentional. Is there some chance that Igaram's role has been adjusted for a slightly different storyline? Not only is he not referred to as Mr. 8, but they don't even use the alias that he is first introduced under, the mayor of Whiskey Peak, Igarapoi. Granted, his reveal is not necessarily a big plot point or a huge twist in the story, such as with other characters like Kuro, where hiding his true identity is a necessity per se, but it just seems so odd not to use either of his aliases if they were going to treat this character how he was treated in the source material. Part of me wonders if they've abbreviated this role to the point where keeping his identity concealed is deemed unnecessary. Much like they decided to kill Mary off in Season 1, I could see them having his death be permanent in this season after his decoy ship is set aflame by Miss All Sunday. I hope it's not the case, but I can totally see them continue this effort of making right on the fake-out deaths of years past. All that said, we do have some confirmation that his Baroque Works partner Miss Monday will be adapted in this season, as evidenced by her wig being shown in that set tour video, so that does lend a bit more credence for his original role being preserved. We'll just have to see. And last but not least, we got the casting for the owner of the arms shop in Logtown, Ipponmatsu, who's going to be played by James Hiroyuki Liao. You may recognize him from his roles in popular shows such as Barry, Cowboy Bebop, or Blue Bloods, and interestingly, he is one of the few American actors in the show outside of the main cast. Ipponmatsu has a relatively small role in the series at large, as he facilitates Zoro acquiring his two new swords, the Sandai Kitetsu and the Yubushiri. We saw the former in a promotional image shared a few months ago. During that set tour video, we got quite an extensive look at how his weapon shop would be adapted, going from a more humble look in the source material to a luxurious display in the live action. While Ipponmatsu is present for one of the more iconic scenes in early One Piece, with Zoro testing his luck against the Sandai Kitetsu, his only subsequent appearance would be in the Decks of the World cover story over 500 chapters later. There's really not too much explicitly known about this character, but given various reveals introduced much later in the series, there is an interesting direction that they could take with him. Brief spoiler warning ahead, if you're not caught up through the Wano arc, I would recommend skipping to the final section of the video at this point. Alright, eventually, we learned throughout the Wano arc and various SBS questions that 55 years prior to present day, a group of 25 people left Wano and ended up in the East Blue. Among this party included Zoro's grandmother, Shimotsuki Furiko, as well as Kuina's grandfather, Shimotsuki Kozaburo, who had forged the Wado Ichimonji that Zoro holds in present day. 10 members of this group decided to settle in what would become known as Shimotsuki Village, where Zoro grew up. But what happened to the other 15 is unknown. Perhaps we could learn from the live action that some of those people from Wano ended up in different parts of the East Blue, including Logetown. This could be a means of explaining the Sandai Kitetsu's presence in a random East Blue weapons shop, since after all, it was forged by the former shogun of Wano, Kozuki Sukiyaki. If Oda wanted to, perhaps he could also tease Tashigi's origins as well, with many speculating her resemblance to Kuina coming from a potential common Shimotsuki lineage. This would give a lot more weight to that weapon shop scene for those in the know, as 3 descendants of Wano unknowingly come together in present day. But hey, this is all just good fun speculation, and either way, I'm excited to see what ends up making its way into Logetown. With all of that casting out of the way, I think it's about time to start considering the more significant characters that are left. If you haven't been keeping up with the leaks and rumors fairly closely, there may be some spoilers in this section, so be warned. If you want to click out now, I appreciate you for staying with me this far. Alright, let's get into it. Of course, we still have the full reveal of Chopper and his voice actor. The good folks over in the One Piece live action Discord server seem to have narrowed down who will be voicing Chopper a while back, but I won't get into it in this video to leave that surprise for down the road. But I can't wait until we get more of Chopper's design. There are also a few characters who we know the casting for that have yet to be formally announced, but thanks to their presence in that table read video, we've been able to confirm their involvement in the series. If you're interested in a who's who of the actors in that room, you can check out my full breakdown on the channel. Here we have Daniel Barnett, who will be playing the Logetown fishmonger Sapi, as well as Fadzai Simango, who will be playing Chief Petty Officer Mashikaku. Also present in this room was Naomi Hughes, who is speculated to be playing Bartolomeo. We believe Marshall T. Bachaman to have been present here, as well as Richard Gao, but it's not clear who they will be portraying. Of note, this table read included some of the actors that would be in the first 2 episodes, which would be Logetown and Reverse Mountain, and as such, many have speculated Gao to have the role of Yorkie, the captain of the Rumbar Pirates, and some even think Bachaman could be portraying Brook, but this is all still heavy speculation. As mentioned earlier, we know Miss Monday will be in the season, but many are still holding out hope for Mr. Tubon Clay, as he was first teased during the Little Garden arc and fully revealed at the tail end of Drum Island. Speaking of, we may also get a tease of Ace, given that the Drum Island arc ends with a brief flashback to him having visited the island about a week prior. Zolo Mariduena of Cobra Kai and Blue Beetle fame is a fan favorite actor it seems, but I wouldn't be surprised if we got a stand-in akin to the Smoker tease at the end of Season 1. There are probably a bunch more characters that the creators of the show may decide to tease in this season, what with the rest of the Alabasta saga being so close, so we may get more hints of Brokeworks members or other Marines, and if we get any more casting announcements down the line, I'll be sure to cover them on this channel. That said, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.